Hello. Hi, Julius and Wayne.
Hi, Yasin. Good morning.
Yeah.
Good to see
Good
you
morning.
this wonderful sunny New Year.
Yeah, it finally stopped raining in Singapore.
Yes, yes.
Much easier to wake up nowadays. Yeah, so for those of you who are not familiar, I think we had a super rainy season in Singapore for the past like 2 weeks. So since New Year, it has been heavy rain all the way. Yeah, but I think I was just reading some report that for the next 2 weeks of the month, it will be back to our sunny weather. Yeah, so thanks everyone for joining us today on a Saturday morning, and welcome to our first event of the year at Google Developer Space. So a big hello to everyone, whether you're tuning in from GDG Singapore or GDG Philippines as well. And I'm Jia Sing from the Google Developers Relations team, and Julius and Wei Yuan are from GDG Singapore. Before we begin, let me briefly introduce who we are and what we do. Google Developer Space is a platform for developers and startups in the region to learn and connect with one another. As part of the developer relations team, we aim to empower and connect the community to our people, programs, network, and technologies. Without further ado, I'll hand the stage over to Julius and Wei Yuan to share more about today's session.
Hey, thank you so much, Jasin. Hello, everyone. It's so good to see you all in the first event of our year. And we'd like to welcome you all with Christian McCarrick. Many of you might know him in his online podcast. He's hosting Simple Leadership, interviewing a lot of people from Silicon Valley who have positions in tech leadership. And in a few minutes, we'll be very much happy to hear him speak to us as well. And you have the YouTube live feed there where you can put in your questions. So let's make it interactive, and hopefully we can learn a lot from this session. We'd like to thank our partners as well. Thank you for Google Developer Space Singapore, who has graciously provided us this avenue for us to stream, as well as our friends from Kuala Lumpur, Philippines, Baguio, and so on and so forth, who have shared our events. And hence, welcome to our friends from the Philippines, and of course, all around the world. Please also do follow us in Facebook, in our YouTube channel as well. We are more than happy to talk to you, and hope to see you next time we have our subsequent events as well. This stream, it's also available live in Developer Space as well as GDG Philippines YouTube channel. And Wayan will be giving a brief introduction about project rework, hence handing over the microphone to Wayan.
Hey everyone, really happy to see all of you guys here on a bright and sunny Saturday morning. As Jia Sing mentioned, finally the rain has stopped, although I think we're getting the hot weather back again, so that's a little bit annoying. Okay, so just to introduce you guys to the project rework, some of you all might already be aware of some of the initiatives that we have done within the year of 2020. Some of you have already been part with us with the event of I think Bruce, one of the directors of Netflix in engineering, as we saw last year, and we had a few other events, revolving around that. So mainly in rework, it's in regards to things like leadership, work culture in the workplace. And we are really excited to be sharing with you guys a string of events that we're going to be doing over the next few months. Okay, so let's look at the next slide. Okay, so not just for this month, in fact, in the coming months, in February, February 20th, we're going to have another exciting discussion with Chris with the topic managing high and low performers. So this is a topic that has been asked a lot, by our viewers. In fact, in our previous year as well, in the other discussion. So this would be a very, very exciting talk that you would like to maybe you would like to join. And next slide. Yeah, and coming into March, we have yet another exciting discussion. So working better together, looking at working culture in the workplace. And this is directly from someone in Google. So Prasad, who's the Vice President of People Operations, we'll be very excited to hear him in a few months. So again, make sure that you join us in our GDG community group. So just now, I think in the page that we shared earlier on, I think at the end of this, like we will share it again. So make sure you join our group, also our Facebook group as well. Once we have any updates in regards to these events, you'll be able to get them immediately. So we hope to see you there, during these events. Okay. And yeah, as always, I think this is a slide that's very familiar to, for people, for those who have been here for many times with us, be it in GDG Singapore, GDG Cloud, we've been sharing this for a long time. And I think to reiterate, we are always very excited to hear from, new voices in the community and also present voices. If you have a project that you have been working on, not just an open source project, your own project, it could be something within your company. And, this is something you would like to share with the community at large. Do feel free to sign up at this link over here and propose to us your topic, and we'll get back to you and reach out to you, in terms of trying to slot you in, to get your discussion and your voice out there for the audience. So yeah, take note of this link over here if you're excited to look at sharing your own projects or initiatives with the community. And so without further ado, I think let's invite in our speaker for today. So our speaker for today is Christian, as introduced by Julius, engineering leader at Facebook.
Good morning, everyone. Julius, Wei-Yen, thank you very much for the invitation. I appreciate it. Last time I saw Julius, it was midnight your time, and you were attending a session I was doing, so I can only return the favor. It's only 6:30 in California, so it's certainly not as bad, but thank you.
Thank you for being with us.
Absolutely.
Cool. All right, handing over the microphone to you, Christian.
Great. Well, hello, everyone. It's hard to get used to doing some of these talks when I'm the only one here and I sort of talk into a kind of empty screen, but I do want to, I know this is in the Singapore, and I know also that it's in the Philippines as well. I've actually spent some time in each. A shout out to some of my former teammates in BGC in Manila, over at Telmate. Also today, I'm going to be talking a little bit about lessons learned in 20 years of engineering leadership. I look back and it's been 20 years. Hopefully I don't seem that old, but definitely have learned a lot over that time period. And kind of the format of this talk, this is very much going to be a tips and tricks style. I'm going to go broad versus deep. I think as I go through the different items, I may talk about a few points for each one, but certainly this talk will not do justice to each of the points. I could probably do a whole podcast or a whole talk about each of them. A little background about myself, as Julie said. I'm engineering leader over at Facebook today. I support a number of teams on Facebook Messenger. I think messaging is super important. It's messaging and communication are some of the things I will definitely talk about here today. Previous to Facebook, which I joined just last year, I was VP of engineering at a company called Auth0, running identity as a service. And ironically, I have been working remote and managing remote teams for a number of years now. So I'm not really going to probably get into remote teams too much, but I'm certainly happy to answer some of those questions later on during the Q&A, because I've certainly been doing it for a lot. And I know everyone is pretty much managing remote teams right now. Let's see. Also, I was asked to remind everyone, there's a Q&A function here. Please ask your questions. I'll be talking maybe 30, 45 minutes, and then I'll be happy to make this a bit interactive and answer as many questions as I can from everyone here. So again, as I did mention, I have, this might look familiar to some people in Singapore. Early on in my career, I actually was doing work for a startup, and I lived in Singapore for about a year. I was only supposed to stay for 2 weeks, but this is another building that might look familiar to some people. I ended up going to Singapore for 2 weeks and staying there for pretty much a year, living out of the Westin Stanford Hotel. So very familiar with that. It's a great place. I hope to get back when COVID is over and I can travel again. Okay. A couple of things, high level of topics. Today, I'm going to go over a couple of things, management and leadership, projects and execution, some things around career growth, some things around self-improvement and self-care, and then we'll get on to the Q&A. You might see me share my screen and stop sharing my screen. I know that I'm just a little dot here. I didn't have a presentation for every single slide that I do, just a couple of bullet points, and I want to make sure that I can do this as interactively as possible. You also might see me stand up and sit down. I'm at a sit-stand desk, so as this might go on for quite a while, you might see me sit up and stand down. So please don't mind me when I do that. Okay. I think at a very high level, one of the things I definitely want to talk about under the management and leadership point has to do mostly around communication. I think communication is pretty much, I would say, one of the number one skills that I have learned as a leader. I've also learned that communication is not only important in leadership, it's important sort of up and down at every level where you are in your career. Not only is it important in your professional career, but communicating and learning how to communicate well in your personal life is such an important thing. And I think everyone can stand to improve on communication. I think there's a couple of, there's a book out there that I recommend to a lot of people that I coach. Is called Crucial Conversations. That's certainly a book that isn't necessarily related to engineering or leadership, but it is around communication and how to really have and handle some of those hard communications and those hard conversations that you certainly might have. But certainly communicating well is about communicating up, communicating down, and communicating also across to your peers, and making sure that that communication is certainly important. One of the things I've learned as an engineering leader, especially as an engineering leader that is now distributed, I think it is super, super important to communicate and to repeat yourself. I think one of the mistakes a lot of people make is that they say, well, I did a post, I did it in Slack or chat, or I did it in all hands. I think you have to do all of those, and you have to repeat that message again and again and again. Once people and your team start saying, I already heard you say that, or stop saying that, I think that's probably the time when you've actually said something enough, right? A litmus test that I use to see how my managers are doing. Sometimes when I'm interviewing managers or they're a new manager and they ask, well, how do I measure success? One of the measures that I have for success as some of the managers that I have underneath me that I support is when I'm doing my skips and my skip levels, I ask every IC, to tell me in their words various messages that I've conveyed. They could be project goals, it could be our mission, our strategy, what our priorities are. And what I'm listening for is to hear back pretty much the same message that I was communicating, either at an all hands myself or I communicated to my managers in order for them to cascade down. So it's super important not just to communicate, but to double check that what you're saying is actually having the impact and people are understanding it in the way that you are expecting them to, right? So I think that is super, super important. The other thing too, I think, is that one of the things that's super important is around not only communicating your messaging, communicating everything else, but I've found a thing that a lot of engineering leaders and engineers in general don't do the best job of is around communicating the impact of the work that they're doing. I found myself, and this is something that I have a coach, and I'll get to that in a minute, was that I was always so focused on doing the work, which is clearly the most important thing. But if you don't explain the work, if you don't show the work, if you don't show that out to your peers, to the managers and whatnot, a lot of people aren't going to know that the work is. So it's super important to be a little bit of a PR machine, not only for you personally, and I'll get to that in your personal brand in a little bit, but also for your team. Part of your job as a leader of your team is to make sure that everyone in the company knows the hard work that your team is doing and the impact that it's certainly having. All right, so I think that is super, super important. And if you need help doing that, reach out to other people. I've found if you reach out to some people in sales or marketing, basically you want to kind of market your team because sort of it's not only about the work you do, but it's about the perception of the work you're doing too. And that really kind of took me a long time to really understand, because I thought a lot of that work was really kind of wasteful, right? I want to focus on delivering, I want to focus on shipping, but it's super important, especially the higher you go, to let your boss and your managers understand the work you're doing, especially if it's a CEO or someone else in another department that might not be technical and might not have a good grasp of the work. I'm sure a lot of you have been, you've heard someone say, well, that's easy, right? You should be able to do that in a weekend. And sometimes that's a very incorrect assumption, and it's your job to make sure that people understand the complexity and the scope of the work, the thing that you do. Okay. I think another thing about communicating is about expectations. I think this is something that I have found leads to probably some of the most issues across all the teams that I've seen in the past. Appropriately setting expectations. And this could be setting expectations for an engineer on your team. This is what you expect them to accomplish. This is the time frame. This is the quality. Setting expectations for other teams. Letting them know that this is what you are understanding is the goal and what you should achieve. And making sure that you set those, it's in writing, and everyone understands that, right? I think that's super important as well. Communicating, I think, too, is another thing that's important, especially as managers and leaders. Always explain the why of what you're doing and how it relates to the vision, goals, etc. There's a great book and a YouTube video from Simon Sinek, Start with the Why. It's really super important from a motivational standpoint, from an understanding, to tie in sort of the goals, whether it's OKRs, whether it's quarterly goals, or whether it's a project you're working on, what you're doing, and part of your job as a manager to describe how an engineer on your team and the work they're doing ties into your group goals, your org goals, and your company goals. Something else that I've seen, if people don't understand the impact in the wider org of what they're doing, they tend to get less motivated and be less excited about being in their job. Okay. A couple other tips here, kind of management leadership. This is something that I tell people too. I think as a manager, it's important to sort of trust your intuition in almost every area. If you think there's an issue, there's a red flag on a project, on a contract, on a deal, you don't feel great about the timeline, you don't feel great about what people are sort of asking you to do. If you don't feel it, if you get that's tingly spidey sense, then probably there's something wrong. So I think I've learned some mistakes I've had in the past, or when I've had that little thing in my head say, that doesn't quite feel right, I don't feel comfortable with that. Pretty much every single time, that has really led to something that I should have dealt with immediately, and it would have been a lot easier at that point. I think one of the few exceptions I have for sort of trusting your intuition is going to be with hiring. I think that's something where sometimes intuition can lead to bias, and sort of, and that's something I know Google, Facebook, some of the large companies certainly have processes in place where hiring is really made to kind of help reduce the impact of biases. But if you're working at a startup, if you're working at a smaller company, sometimes your bias is to hire someone that resembles you, and that sort of feeling, the comfortable feeling. Certainly, though, that's something, make sure to put in processes in place to get lots of feedback and lots of other people in the room for hiring decisions. Okay. The other thing too, sort of related to this, if you ever feel like you have an employee and it's a piece of feedback, if you're ever deciding on whether or not to give feedback to somebody, whether you should say something or not about maybe an issue, the answer is predominantly always yes. That's another thing that I've found too, because you'll start making excuses. Well, I didn't say it the last time. I'll say it in our one-on-one, or I'll say it at our quarterly. I'll say it at our performance review. It's always best to just say those things sort of right away. Kind of another high-level bullet point here. The thing that I find a lot of new managers struggle with is wanting to be liked. And I think that it's important to be trusted and respected, but it's not always important to be everybody's friend. And that's a challenge specifically for new managers, and specifically for managers who are potentially managing former peers. Kind of everyone has this internal thing they want to be liked. It's not really your job as a manager to be liked. It's not a popularity contest, but you should have a goal of being trusted by your team and being respected by your team. So the one thing that I can't remember who told this to me, but it's a lesson I've learned. I call it the one drink rule. Well, maybe not during COVID, but when we ever get back to kind of going out with your team, if I was ever going out with my team, people under me, I want to be seen as sort of an approachable person. So we'd go out to a restaurant, a cafe, a bar, and I would stay for one drink. And I would buy, as a manager, I would sort of buy the drinks for that team, whether it's soda or something alcohol, pay the tab, and then I'd go home early. One, it gets you out of trouble, potentially of having too much to drink, and being seen with having too much to drink, which is never appropriate. But also it's a time where people and your people that work for you, they go out, they probably want to talk about you. Right? You're probably not perfect. They want to say things about you. So go in, kind of be seen as an approachable manager, buy a drink for your team, and then go home. Or go to another bar with your other managers, and then continue drinking and talk about the employees you have, and so you can talk about each other. I think that's certainly something that can help a lot with mitigating any potential issues. Another thing I definitely want to get up to under this chapter or this section is learn how to handle reorgs and organizational growth. It's something I find people only deal with as a necessity and then really mess up their first times. Actually, let me see if I can share this. This is sort of a book I have here. It's called An Elegant Puzzle by Will Larson. Certainly something that he has a lot of blog posts in here. And he has a lot of good chapters. There's a chapter in there on organizational growth and org design. It's something that I highly recommend everyone to look at. And a caveat, when I do recommend books or whatnot too, I do want to say that, use it as an input. I don't necessarily mean go and do exactly sort of what this person in this book says. I think that that can get you in trouble too. I mean, we all are familiar with the ICs and the engineers who go off and read a blog post about the latest technology, and Monday morning comes and they're trying to rewrite your code in whatever the latest thing is. Managers can fall into that trap too. But there are a lot of resources out there that you can actually use as input, and a lot more than when I first started managing. There was pretty much almost nothing except for some of the old school books out there. A couple of other things, I've certainly learned. Never try to cover anything up with a mistake. Early managers, I think, feel sometimes that they're expected to know everything. That's not the case. You don't know everything, and you won't. I make mistakes. I still don't know everything. I learn things every day. What I've found is the most effective thing is if you mess up, you make a mistake, communicate that out as early as possible. Communicate the mistake you made. Simultaneously, potentially come up with a plan for remediate that mistake. I've found that pretty much no matter the mistake you've made, if you're open, honest, and come at it with a plan for fixing it or remediating it or make sure it won't happen again, a lot of people will respect you a lot more than that, than not doing that. And in some cases you get fired. So certainly not that. Give credit when credit is due. Super simple thing, right? Some managers, it's not your job to take credit for work anymore. It's your job to support your team, and it's your job to give them the credit. Credit will come to you, just sort of, passively. I think everyone knows that as a leader of your team, you're going to get some credit. So you don't have to go out and explicitly say it's credit. Give credit to who it's due for your team or on other teams, and you'll see that that's kind of karma, and it will come back to you. Feedback, I think super important as well as for managing. Often, I've actually even found super fast feedback right now. I give feedback live sometimes in Slack or whatever your sort of work chat tool is. I can give people sometimes real feedback in the middle of a meeting or conversation. I think that might have been a little harsh, or why don't you bring this point up? So I found sometimes this working from home can actually lead to some instant feedback, and people tend to appreciate that as well. This should go without saying, but be present when talking to your employees. If you are remote, sometimes I'm guilty of this, right? It's easy to have a lot of tabs open. You're having a one-on-one, you have something flashing in the corner. You just, you're all looking at me right now. And you can tell if I do this, right? So it's pretty clear to your employees that you're not paying attention to them, and then they're going to lose some of that trust with you and the openness with you. If you're in person, you have a phone, put it down, close your laptop, unless you're taking notes. I do also like to take notes by hand too, instead of a laptop. Sometimes it's better than having this sort of screen in front of you when you're on a one-on-one meeting. Okay. And the thing that I'm going to end this particular one section on is this, and you'll find a theme here. If you want to learn how to management leadership, you have to learn how to let it go. You have to learn how to delegate. Okay. So I'm going to move on to the next one, which is sort of projects and execution. And I'm going to go through again with a number of just tips that I've found here as well. So number one, I think realistically, execution is the number one reason you have your job, right? If you don't perform, if you don't deliver, if you don't have impact, then you're not going to last long at that company. And there's a lot of ancillary things that go into making sure that you're executing, having good impact, and everything else. And all that goes into the great manager behaviors, having a great team, being supported, building a safe space, right? But ultimately, you have to have that impact. So that's super important. One of the things that I've found from teams too is, again, this theme of starting with the why. There's a great quote from Patrick Qua. It says, "I've seen too many technical debates fail because they first didn't agree on the problem, agree on the why, and then move on to the what." So many times I've seen specifically engineers want to tackle how to do something versus whether or not they should do it, or they're tackling the right problem. Always sort of take a step back. There's another saying, measure twice, cut once. Super important about why are you doing this? What is the impact it's going to lead to? Should you even do it? And then go on to exactly why you're doing it, and then move on to the how you're going to do it and what's going to happen. That's just certainly something that is super important. I think the other thing that becomes super important that a lot of people do not do a great job of is time management. Time management is one of those things that it's sort of like entropy. Everything will just fill up your calendar 100%. People will take your time. Well, you need to own your time. So how do you, Sheryl Sandberg of Facebook talks about, ruthlessly prioritizing isn't about, deciding to do the good things and not doing the bad things. It's about deciding to do the really, really super excellent, important things, but then still leaving pretty darn good things on the table that you're not going to be able to do right now. And prioritization and coming up with a prioritization framework is going to be critical to your success, to really put you into the next level for being a great executor. All right. So prioritization, super important. There's lots of, I just threw the slide up here, Eisenhower matrix, important, urgent, lots of different frameworks out there if you Google them for how you want to use. Pick one, stick with it, and use a methodology, but definitely you're going to have to prioritize. The other thing too that I've found This is just a sample. It's not my calendar, but there's lots of things. Again, you can Google calendar blocking, putting in focus times, something that I really have struggled to do, and I live by my calendar. So, how do you want to put your one-on-ones? Do you want to put them all together? Do you want to put your time? It's that interrupt-driven work, just like your engineers. And this is something that I try to coach and work with my teams on from an IC level, as well as the managers. There's time management and calendar blocking is super important, both for managers as well as ICs. I think another super important thing is being able to say no. Learning how to say no, again, super, 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 I think super important. And saying no needs to be an active decision, right? You have to sort of say and explicitly say, these are the things I'm going to do. And also explicitly say the things that you're not going to do. Again, that comes onto the previous point I made about setting expectations. Sometimes people might assume that you're doing something, or they thought you were going to do something, or maybe you just didn't put it on a slide. So I found it's super important in communication, putting in the things you're going to tackle, say in a quarterly goal or half or a plan or a project spec, but also explicitly leaving out the things you're not doing. And sometimes those things can lead to some really good conversations about trade-offs, et cetera. Now, sometimes I say no by saying yes and. You don't necessarily always want to be seen as this person saying no, but I'll say yes. Of course I can. Of course I'll add, feature B. What should I take away? And in that case, you start to push the prior decisions up and out. You don't have to be the only one making these decisions. If you're getting a lot of pressure to add something or add another project or do something, another answer I've found that works well is, yeah, absolutely. I can, we can do that. Which things are we going to let slip because of that? And a lot of people are like, well, what do you mean? You can't do both? No. I can't do both. You're telling me this is super important. Let's do it. But why don't you work with me on which of these other things has to fall below the line to do that? And again, sometimes you'll find that, oh, well, it's not that important, or you'll agree on something and do some reprioritization. So I think that's also important as well. So another important thing about execution, get as good as you can at making decisions faster versus perfect. There's I couldn't find the quote before this, but I think Harvard Business has done some interesting studies when they looked at success of startups and companies, and they found that the companies that made more decisions were more successful than the ones that made fewer decisions, even though the decisions might have been better. There's another thing. Jeff Bezos has another thing about sort of the decisions that are you can take back or reverse, and the ones that you can't. Right? Spend the time on those 10 or 20% of the decisions that are going to have the most impactful, the ones that are the hardest to unwind, and just most of the decisions are going to be good enough. Put systems in place to allow you to gather the data and to use that data quickly to make the decisions faster and better. Something that I've had feedback on from a lot of people, from board of directors to senior leadership teams to executives, be seen as someone who can make the tough calls and the tough decisions, especially under pressure and especially quick. I think that this is a trait and a skill that doesn't come easy. But if you're seen as someone who can make those tough calls, can make those tough decisions, typically I've found that you will be more successful than the people who cannot do that. Empowering your employees to make decisions. I think this is super important, especially if you're running distributed teams, if you're running remotely, if you have large teams. You have to kind of make the decision-making ability to go lower and down. You've obviously hired people. You've hired them for a reason. Empower them to make the decisions because it just makes everything quicker. Hopefully you're seeing a pattern here. Decisions. There's lots of things about decisions. Make them quicker. Use data, set up in systems to make better ones faster, and delegate decisions too. Okay. The other thing that helps with the decision-making process is standardizing. standardization for process, code, etc. If you're a larger company, there tends to be more of this, but if you're a smaller startup, you don't want people's precious mental cycles being used for, well, which build process do I use for this set of code? How do I deploy this one? Just make it super easy and have them focus on the hard problems. Okay. Couple of quick other tips in this section. If you're a leader, embrace using technical project managers for cross-team projects. I've found them to be super effective. I know larger companies tend to use them more, but sometimes they're frowned at smaller companies. I don't know why. It's sort of the secret weapon I have for helping projects to get, execute more smoothly, is TPMs. Super important. If you're a senior leader, use the resources you have available to you. It could be, an admin, it could be something else. It could be a chief of staff level type person. Utilize the resources you have, and then help them help you scale better. Okay. I think again, I'm going to repeat this one again. Process and execution, learn how to delegate. The more you can delegate, the more you can do that, the more people are going to grow in their own careers, and the more you can scale and scale yourself. Okay. Let's see. I think the next one here is going to be around career growth. I'm going to, let's see, career growth here. Something I think is important that I fell into this trap too. It's okay to take a step back in your title for a good opportunity at a different company. Early on in my career, I let my ego get in the way of, I was a director here and I only was going to be a manager somewhere else. And, I was like, I don't know, younger than I am today. I was like, well, I'm a director. I'm not going to take something else. And, my career trajectory has been fine. However, certainly I have learned, and something I do coach for my team and former people in the team and other coaching I do, it's okay to take a step back, especially if you're going to, say, a larger company or you're going to a company that is growing super rapidly. You're going to kind of get back to the level you want to be. If you're a high performer, if you're conscientious, if you work hard, you have impact, you're going to grow, you're going to get advanced. So it's okay to take a step back. If you really want to grow your career, go to a fast-growing company, or inside of a company, choose a fast-growing team. Nothing helps accelerate your career growth more than being on a fast-growth team. By nature, they're hiring more people. They have to promote people sometimes before they're ready. But it's certainly that rocket ship ride. If you want to grow your career fast, that's certainly one way to do it. I'm not saying it's the best way, but it's certainly one way to do it. As an engineering leader, you can think, I'm not going to go too deep into this. Are you going to go on the CTO path? You're going to go on like the VP of engineering path. Those are very, very differently depending upon the kind of company. Typically, though, the VP Eng is more about project execution and leadership and leading. CTO a little bit more about technical direction, and innovation, etc. A couple of things. Job searching. If you're looking for jobs, always try to get an introduction. I think that's certainly, even myself, most of the jobs I think I've ever gotten, I can count on my maybe a few digits, like how many I got by actually just firing off a resume. So even a second degree connection on LinkedIn or a friend of a friend, ask them to sort of get an introduction to the hiring manager or submit your resume. It goes from, sort of like a 1% success rate to like a greater than 90% success rate by actually knowing somebody and trying to get them in front of the hiring manager, the hiring committee, the recruiter, whoever it might be. And the thing that I've found is a lot of engineering managers don't necessarily know how to prepare for interviews. I think a lot of us are ICs, and we've had a lot of experience with interviewing at other companies, coding exercises, system designs. I think things like that we have a much better understanding of. But I find that most engineering leaders kind of flounder a bit, and they don't really know how to go for the interview process at jobs. Some of the larger companies, I think Google, Facebook, they try to guide you along the way with what some of the expectations are. But still, I still think it requires a lot of preparation that a lot of engineering managers don't do. They'll overcompensate on, say, system design or even some coding preparation if your company still does that. And they fall flat a little bit around, like the management types of questions. So I think if you get some interview prep for what's important, really do your homework. It's super important. One of the methodologies I sort of follow for the non-technical sides of my interviews typically is, here's my philosophy on something, whether it's hiring, whether it's on poor performers, whoever it might be. I sort of give an overview of what I believe my philosophy is. And then I really drill down into the one or two very specific examples that I've had in my career that support my philosophy. And it's super important. When I was looking at one of my past jobs, look back, I think I wrote like 35 pages of potential questions and answers. I'm a bit thorough. That's just what I am. When I prepare for my podcast, I usually have like 150 questions and I ask like 10. But I'm always more about being a little bit more over prepared. I think the other thing super important, you mentioned Google Rework, at the very beginning. This is actually something that I know Facebook has its own, but before here, I would use something very similar. I always solicit feedback from my employees in explicit ways, sort of like this. And I also do it in other ways too. Every single one-on-one, I try to end with, what can I do better? How can I help you? How can I support you? How can I improve? And I try to do that, informally, ad hoc with other questions too. Maybe I'm working with someone in sales or with marketing or a product. Hey, we've been working together for a little while. Is there anything I can do to improve this relationship or this execution? So certainly something that I think is super, super important. Always ask for feedback. There's a great book, Thanks for the Feedback. It's another one that's more specific around how to receive feedback and how to receive it, how to process it, what you can do with it. I think there's a lot of books on how to give feedback, but not always a lot of information about how to receive feedback properly. Okay. Again, from a career standpoint, one of the things that I do, and I started doing, I was reporting a lot of CEOs a lot of time. They don't have a lot of time for you. Unsolicited, I tend to write a weekly update for my boss. I write, the top things I did this week, things that were impactful, any things that they should know, heads up on, warnings that they might get an escalation, something that they can talk to their manager about, and anything specific that might be coming up for next week that they should be aware about. And then I have this explicit section there where I say the things I need, asks, for them to do. I don't often fill that last one in, but occasionally I let it be clear. I need this from you. I need an escalation. I need an approval. Whatever it may be. And this sort of document I have, it's a working doc that I do. I think really helps your managers to have a good understanding that you're on top of things. You know what you're doing, and that you're being transparent. It's also very helpful for the end of the half or the year when you do performance reviews. You just sort of cycle back through there, pick out all the highlights of the work you've done, and it makes this process super, super easy. Okay. I think the last thing for this as well, I mentioned this before, from a career standpoint, I found a lot of people do not do great self-advocacy. And you really have to make sure that people know about the work you do. And I found that this is even more important for members of underrepresented groups who feel maybe less empowered to do this. But this is something I do coach people to do. Now, it's one thing. We all have the engineer that does this to the other extreme, where they're shouting from the rooftops how awesome they are, and that's, we don't want a big ego. But there is a fine line of, making sure that people know the impact that you have in the work you do. Okay. I think the other thing that people have a hard time with, this is a great article, Molly Graham, Give Away Your Legos. If anyone wants to Google this, it's on First Round Review, which is a great periodical online that I recommend people to look at. People have a hard time letting go. Oh, if I let go of this person, if I let go of this project, if I let go of this team, it's going to look bad. I'm not going to, have as much impact. I think 99% of the entire experience I have with giving something up, I've ultimately gotten more. So it's just super important to it's okay to let things go, even if you worked on it for a while. Delegate, hand it off, like transition it to someone else. All that's doing is leaving room for you to now take on that higher and better project that you have. Okay, again, let it go, delegate. Kind of going to the last section here, and then I'll get to Q&A. Remember, if you want to, please put comments in the Q&A, and I'll be happy to answer them too. I've found that a lot of managers don't take care of themselves enough, especially in COVID now, especially working remote. The boundaries are really hard. Make yourself a priority. If you can't take care of yourself, you're not going to be in any good position to take care of your team. And if you don't take care of yourself, if you're working every night, if you work every weekend, you're also setting up your team that's the example for success, and they'll emulate you. And, I don't know if you want to have a team where everyone's working nights and weekends and not taking care of themselves. So really try to take care of it yourself. Read every day. If I was to say, what's the secret to my success or, the challenges that I've been able to overcome, it's certainly been reading. And reading I think reading is so important for a couple of reasons. The one that is important too is nonfiction as well as fiction. And why is fiction important? They've done lots and lots of studies which show that people who read fiction have a greater ability to empathize with other people and to empathize with other people's points of view and experiences. And being a manager, empathy is so important. So that's why, whatever fiction you want, that's up to you, but certainly try to read fiction. And then nonfiction, whether it's periodicals, blogs, websites, or books. I mentioned the First Round Review is an awesome one to look at. The Harvard Business Review is another one that I highly recommend to kind of go and look at the archive of articles. A lot of great information there. Lots of books. I mentioned one sort of in the beginning, but reading, super important. It's something that I try to do every single go. Finally, again, if you one tip to take away from this is just learning to delegate, doing it well, doing it often. You can't take on that new responsibility. You can't take on that new team. You can't take on the new project if you have not delegated properly and allowed yourself the space and the time and the ability to take on, the bigger projects and to help yourself scale. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I kind of just whipped through a bunch of that. Like I mentioned, it was very fast, very much a tips and tricks. I could have gone into so much detail on any one of these, and I'd be happy to. You reach out to me on Twitter, C. McCarrick, or my podcast, simpleleadership.io, or Facebook, or whatever. I'd be happy to answer some questions as well. So with that, I think, let's see. We can get into the Q&A.
All right. Thank you so much, Christian, as always. It's whenever you speak, it always feels like we're swallowing water from the fire hydrant. Thank you so much for all the wisdom that you have shared. So yeah, let's jump into the question. I think Wayan will be the first one to pick from some of the prepared questions that were sent to us.
So I think we can start off with this question over here. So I think based off of what you have shared with us so far, in terms of the tips and tricks towards leadership, on the other end of the spectrum, in terms of assessing whether your leaders are effective or not, like what metrics do you usually look out for?
Sure. So I think at a very high level, the inverse and the success and the inverse of that, the failure. As I mentioned, the first thing, you have to execute. So ultimately, you want to look at if you're not executing, and that execution could be dependent upon whatever goals that you had set out initially, right? So that goes into that clarity of expectations. So again, making sure as a leader, you set the expectations clear. Maybe there are expectations from top down, from above you, their company-wide orgs, or their team expectations, whatever they may be, and how you're measuring success from a tactical standpoint. Like, you want to increase your user base, you want to increase the number of views on a page, you want to increase whatever it might be. That's one measure, but that's not the whole picture. Because if you are maybe meeting those goals, and your team is quitting and you have attrition and they're burnt out and your feedback scores are super low, that's not success, right? So in my mind, it's taking as a baseline, right? You have to meet whatever your quarterly objectives and goals are for your team and what you've committed to. But for me, again, success for me is what is the attrition level on my team? Are people staying on the team? Are they happy? Are they growing? Are you able to provide opportunities in your team to show career growth for people? And the one case when attrition is okay is if someone leaves your team to get a larger role on a different team, right? I'll support that all day, right? Because that shows that you have done your job in helping that person in their career, because maybe your team doesn't have an opportunity right now. There's lots of times that happens, and I would much rather have a person on a team go to another team so they could increase their scope and their responsibility if I wasn't able to. And I look for my managers to see, are they letting that there too? Is that the values that they have? I look at, again, attrition. I look at whatever the sort of feedback scores you're getting in your company. Like, are you getting good feedback on the different metrics you have, like career conversations? Are you having career conversations with people? That's another thing that I do. If you look at the Google rework scores, I think those types of things are super important. Are people feeling safe in a space? Are they feeling that psychological safety? Are they feeling trust? And how do I view that sometimes? Sometimes it's a little intangible. One of the best ways I have for doing that is going to a team meeting or having a feedback session, and everybody's offering their feedback, their advice, like they're open in it, they're willing to share, they're giving that. If I go into sort of teams or meetings and it's silent, and they're willing to talk to you one-on-one about a problem, but they're not willing to bring it up in a group, that to me, I wouldn't say that's a failure, but that's certainly a sign that that trust isn't there in that team yet, right? That vulnerability isn't there. And that happens a lot on brand new teams. So it's also important to look at where the team state is. You're coming in, I would expect that. But over the course of 3, 6, 9 months, you should start seeing those types of things improve. I think hiring too is another thing. That's an indirect thing depending upon how your hiring pipeline is. People want to be on your team. So you'll get a lot of referrals. People want you on your team. They're going to try to get in. If there's an opening, you're going to have a lot of applications, or people on your team will be actively like, come on this team. It's awesome. Here's why it's awesome. So I think those are some signals I have for, measuring sort of that leadership and success. I think those, I can go on and on, but those are some very high level things.
Cool. Thank you so much, Christian. Wayne, do you have a follow-up or?
No, I don't have to.
Okay. Let's go to here we are trying to sense each other what the next thing is. So we have another prepared question. So someone asked, as a technical leader, how can I make sure that the technical direction and solutions are planned, monitored, and implemented properly in a huge organization?
Yeah. If you find out how to do this, awesome, please let me know. I'd be happy to learn as well. I think that one of the things that I mentioned before that really helps in sort of situations like this is utilizing the support networks that you have. That could be, technical project managers or whatever, the program managers or whatever that you might have a large company. This is a huge organization, so I'm gonna scope the answer to a large organization. It's different at sort of smaller startups. But I think that is super important. I think one of the things that I've seen not always happen as well, which falls through the cracks, is alignment across orgs from a prioritization standpoint. And I think this is a super important piece that sometimes gets missed from the planning stages. So I might have a team whose number one priority is to deliver feature X. I might have a dependency on another team. The other team number one priority might be feature Y. And we did our OKRs, we're great, this is what we're going to do. And then after we've submitted them, we say, oh, by the way, the other team, we're going to need your help. And they're like, well, I don't have any help. And that leads to, I think, probably a misalignment of prioritization. I think is super important. So a top thing I have is always, if you're going to have cross-team dependencies or cross-log dependencies, like reach out as early as possible to those and try to get that information and get that alignment. That's in the kind of the planning phases, I would say super important. Again, that direction is super important as well, like, because that comes into what is the alignment, what is the prioritization. Monitor, I think it's super important to have a bit of a, check-ins, a dashboard, I don't know what process you're using, what tools you're using. Some companies have their own, you're using Agile, you're using Jira, you're using Trello, you're using a spreadsheet, I think whatever it might be, just making sure that there are frequent check-ins. I think that's part of the Agile, value is about frequently checking in. I think that's the important thing, not going too far and too long without having check-ins, not only in your team, but across teams. And that's where having a technical project manager becomes really, really helpful, where they can sort of help that coordination and really kind of identifying risks along the way.
Thank you, Christian. And I think to add to the question as well, earlier you mentioned about the technical program/project manager as well as chief of staff. In Singapore, it's something that's not very prevalent yet. Like, could you tell us a bit more about what's a chief of staff and TPM?
Sure. So yeah, I think the chief of staff is interesting. You might sort of business operations. This is something that has become more prevalent, I think, over the last 5 years or so, especially for more and more senior, sort of not only technical leaders, but other leaders. It has been rather common for leaders outside of technology to have that sort of chief of staff to sort of help them. And a chief of staff, some people, it's different. It's not an admin. Like, a chief of staff is usually someone that might be a VP level, like, equivalent sort of at an organization. That is really able to sort of be a proxy for you. If you ever say, hey, how can I duplicate myself? Like, that is maybe a potentially good example of what a chief of staff might be, right? Helping to, be in two places at once, right? They might be helping to, if you have a large team, they might be people might come to them to ask their advice. Maybe, how would Christian, how might the CTO or the VP of engineering, how do you think, let me run this by you first before I present it to them. And this person has a good idea of like how you're thinking about things. They're plugged into the prioritizations. How might I receive that? They might go back and say, well, make these changes, and then sort of go. They might handle some interpersonal conflicts too. Like, they're a little bit of a manager without managing actual people between teams. They're a liaison too between multiple teams and multiple departments. Helping, really being the person with like budgeting, planning, that level. Like, it's really like your right-hand person, so to speak, right? Technical project manager, program manager. I think someone is again, this is really like an execution level type of role where they help planning. They'll help, if you think about, I don't want to use the word Gantt chart, but sometimes if you have large projects, they're going to span sort of lots of interdisciplinary cross teams over a large time frame. Really, they're people that can sort of have a good grasp of where any stage of the project is at the entire time, and they'll be very helpful with, working with whether maybe it's other people on your team for getting the data. Where are you? What's the status? What's at risk? Helping with escalations, being able to, correlate all that or collate all that. And then like presenting it to you with like, here's your one pager, here's the at a glance, here's the product health and status. And they can help run down, chase things, super important. And I think it really helps it's an enabling function that I always find is very important.
Cool. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's move on to some questions from our audience.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna pull up our first question over here. Okay, so the question over here, I'm just going to read it out. What advice would you give to people who come in a team where manager creates a silo, so something we don't really want, and propagates FUD, like don't talk to anyone, everyone is enemy, and so on. So I've just searched on, so I wasn't very familiar with the term FUD, so I searched that up. So it means fear, uncertainty, and doubt. Yeah.
Yes. Well, my first advice would be, maybe start looking for a new team. I think, but that's easy to say, but not always easy to say implement, right? I mean, I think this is clearly a sign of unhealthy dynamic on a team that isn't great. Normally, I see this when a manager is maybe insecure or has a lot of control. They have to have a lot of control. And they want to be the one potentially that's taking credit for things. They want to have the information flow bottleneck to them because it's also job security for them. It's like the anti-pattern for good management. So I think always try to talk to your manager, first. Hey, what's the reasoning behind this? I'm just trying to help so I can support you better. I want to understand, why this is important to do this. Like, just try to understand that a little bit. Maybe there's a way to show an example of, let's try this. Maybe if I talk to Anne or Joe over here, I think maybe this project might be more successful. And if it is more successful, like that, you will look good for that. Like, so there's some potential ways to try to use a little bit of psychology. It's asking a lot for ICs or even managers, to kind of do that. Sometimes you have to play that game. I think ultimately it might be a good time to start slowly looking for the exit and looking for a new manager or a new job. But I know a lot of places that are outside of Silicon Valley and other places, right, it's just not as easy. So, again, I think that the best way is to always try to get the manager to see how it's best for their interests to change their behavior. That's just one example I would have.
So maybe I'll relate to the question. So let's say now let's go on to the other side, on the end of the manager. So now if let's say this engineer is resigning, from your viewpoint as a leader, like what are your reactions towards that? Like, be it making a counter offer, and how should we execute this in a appropriate manner?
I hardly ever counter. As a philosophy for me, I just hardly ever counter. And I feel if an engineer is resigning and I didn't know about it and I wasn't able to do some preventative type of work to prevent the resignation from even happening, then my bad, right? I mean, I wasn't getting enough feedback. I wasn't managing them appropriately. I was not paying attention to some signs or some signals. I wasn't as open. They didn't trust me. Whatever it is, if a resignation comes out of the blue, then that's like at that point the decision is made. Like and I've found too that there's a reason they're leaving. And the only exception that I really have for counteroffering is if it's a potential reason where I can change the actual problem that they're seeing, right? Sometimes they'll resign and I've known about it. And that's sort of different. Like they're resigning because, say, for whatever reason, we're just not paying them enough, right? And they've kind of been open about it. Sometimes a resignation can be an escalation where I can maybe go and try to get more money for them, and if that's the only reason, and maybe we've talked about it, like sometimes that's a case. But I do hate to work in a company where the only time you get more money is if you like quit or threaten to quit. Like that's really not a great company that has a lot of great values in my standpoint. But again, I hardly ever counteroffer, because I'm going to counteroffer. Then if they go to a new company, that new company is probably going to counter the counteroffer, and it just leads to this like turf war. Ultimately, my goal is to get it to a point where just engineers don't feel like they need to resign, right? I mean, I give them opportunity. I advocate for them. But there's those cases, some they might resign because they're moving, their family situation changed, another company just offers so much more money than we can ever give them. You know what? I can't. There's nothing I can do in that case anyway.
Julius,
Okay. Okay. This is the part where we're trying to sense each other. Okay, there's one question from Paul. So he wanted to thank you for such an interesting talk, and he would like to hear more about your view on how a new manager should manage a technical team where some members are more technically competent. Happens to all of us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, that's a dream team for me, right? I mean, I want to have people and hire people that are smarter than me, better than me in specific areas, right? I mean, that's my goal. But it's not always easy. And what's not sort of said here, but oftentimes happens, is how do you build the trust of a team where you might not be the most technical person on the team? And sometimes they might be like, well, how are you my manager if I'm more technical in an area than you? And I think that's kind of what it comes down to. Like, ultimately, it's your goal is to get them to respect you and trust you. And one of the ways that I do this is that describing to them that my role isn't to be a super IC, right? My role is to be a manager. And the manager role is different, right? It has a different set of skills and a different set of responsibilities. And I try to, in one-on-ones, just, again, setting the expectations with the team about what it is that I do. And my role is to support them, right? My role is to support them and to remove the obstacles and the roadblocks that they're having, right? So I often try to go to one-on-ones or the team, especially if it's a new team, and I sort of lay that out. It's like, just be open. Some of you have more experience, you have more domain knowledge in this area, and I'm going to rely on every one of you to give me the best information possible to help make the decisions. And that I phrase that way too, to help, not that I can make them, to have you involved. You will be involved in input in these decisions. It's so important. But my job is to support you. My job is to remove roadblocks and to make your job easier, right? And then I ask them, what are things that are not related to, say, coding right now that take more time, that frustrate you? It could be getting things approved. It could be project time. It could be the build process takes too long. It could be something in HR. It could be their machines are too slow. I mean, you name it. I always try to go and say, what can I do for you that can help make be more productive and be less frustrated? And then I take that list and I try to get as many wins as I can. And then it's sort of that, that's right, you're not a super IC, you have a different role. And now you sort of start showing the benefit to that role. And then within 3 months, usually at the most, it's usually, a problem of the past. And they really appreciate you being their manager and doing all these things for you.
Okay, so I'll move on to another question from the audience, and I think maybe also looking from I think I'm actually also quite interested in this, your response to this question. So as like a leader in a company, when you perform your one-on-ones, what should you usually look out for? Like just now you mentioned about setting expectations. Are there any other things that usually you set out within a one-on-one to achieve with the other person that you are managing, your team member?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think too often one-on-ones devolve into status report updates, right? And that's what I try to avoid. Status reports can be done asynchronously. It could be done during a stand-up. It could be done in like a weekly sort of, document that I send to my boss. So I try to avoid status updates because that becomes the default. A couple of things, I definitely try to look for is just gauging how people are doing. Like what, how are things going, especially in a time of COVID. I find a lot of people are very much like update status, like right into the business side of things. And there's less chat, right? There's less getting to know the person. So especially being remote, I try a little bit more to get to know the person. And start, like the first 5 minutes is always nothing to do with sort of work. How was your weekend? How is your kid, your dog, your hobby, your parents, your whatever, the side project you have? I try to just sort of gauge that, to try to just like value them as a whole person. And I'll, and then I share myself sometimes too, right? Hey, this is what I'm doing. This is how I'm doing. I'm struggling with this. I show some vulnerability, then it gets them. And I'm also trying to look for like changes in behavior over time, especially with being remote. I'm trying to look for signals of like burnout or depression or some things too that are harder to see, like if you're in a person, and, just how to try to suss some of those things out. And then, I also try to, let's different one-on-ones. I try to have like at least quarterly or monthly one-on-ones for career conversations. Okay. Let's set some goals. How are we achieving on those goals? How can we help? I try to potentially do some, like I call it like pair programming with, with situations. If it's a manager that I'm having a one-on-one with, let's walk through a problem you're having with an employee. Let's work through a challenging situation. How can we help you with this? If it's an IC, hey, let's pull up, your last code review. Let's pull up this diff. Like, let's just kind of coach through. Hey, this is or I'll also bring up some things as I look through code reviews. That was a really, I appreciated the comments you had in that code review. It was very helpful. It was insightful. Or the reverse. This was like a one-liner. I didn't really get a lot of signal from this, nor did the person who's code reviewing. Maybe I kind of use them for some coaching opportunities as well, to talk about things like that. So again, how they're doing, looking at them as a whole, career conversation, situational, like let's tackle a specific problem. It could be technical, right? Hey, I'm having a really hard time, with this performance issue. Good. Let's kind of dive into that. Like, what have you done? Let me think about your thought process. Here's some ideas. And then, those are some high level things.
Okay, go to a related question as well. Give me one moment. Okay, so just now I think you briefly mentioned about the entire situation or the work environment now being more remote. I think due to the COVID situation. So I think maybe pivot that to again a related question. How has this impacted how you have interacted with your team members in terms of how you lead them, and what learning lessons should we take away, in terms of this remote experience over the last year?
Yeah, I always try to preface remote questions with that this is not a normal remote situation. Prior to joining Facebook, which was not a remote company, I was at a company, Alt0, which was a remote company, or predominantly remote. And even though that was remote, we still brought new hires to HQ for onboarding. We had an offsite for the entire company every year. We would meet up quarterly to go through some planning and just sort of work together exercises. People could go to a WeWork, they could go to a coffee shop, So I'd like to say that there's working in a pandemic, right? And then there's remote work. And it's hard to say one is the other, because it's a lot harder for me being remote now than it was being remote before, right? Because now it's kids are home from school. Sometimes I feel like I'm a hermit. Like I don't leave my house for days. It's much different. But I think that I think there's a couple of things some lessons learned. Some companies have seen performance output increase, and I don't necessarily think that that's sustainable or long-term or a proper correlation. I think people are working more because there's not much else to do. So I think that's certainly something to look at. Don't look at past performance as a predictor of future performance as it relates to suddenly your team might be more working more. When people can go out to the gym and go to dinner and restaurants and commute times, like you're going to see some of that go back down. So I think that's really something. I think we've had to. I think we've learned that fundamentally, people don't need to be in an office 5 days a week to be productive either, right? And I think that's a huge shift that I don't see us going back to 100%. Any company really, like, no one can say anymore, remote people who aren't in the office can't be productive. Like, you cannot say that anymore. Like, it just doesn't, like, look at Google is doing it, Facebook, every company on the planet, some are doing it better than others. And there's some, social issues of not being, I'm not saying never go back to the office, but I think the argument of you have to be in your seat to be productive is gone, right? That doesn't impact anymore. I think also that communication and written and communication becomes incredibly more important. I think you can't just go in a room anymore. I think the importance of asynchronous work and building tools, better tools around asynchronous work, I think has shown how important and needful that is. You can't always get in a room with a whiteboard. I think I've found that communication tools that support this type of work is super important, as we've seen. And that's another thing that companies are investing in, whether it's externally or internally. I think those are a couple of top things.
Maybe if I can extend this question. So, like you mentioned at the end, in terms of the tools, like some whiteboarding tools for emulating, let's say, the physical presence for having people do discussions. In terms of this, as you mentioned, in a pandemic remote situation, do you have any other tips towards interacting or facilitating better interaction between you and your teammates? Like you mentioned these tools. Are there any other things that you would recommend?
Yeah, I think that there's a couple of tools that I've used. Mural is one. It's really awesome for sticky notes. That's like, everyone used to sticky notes. I love using it for sticky notes, for planning, for lots of reasons. It's a tool that I've come to utilize for a lot. I found that it's super important to take dedicated time to do non-potential work things. I've been doing virtual offsites sort of with the team. Now, if you had a normal offsite, it might last a day or two. I found no more than like 4 hours in front of the Zoom, like before you go crazy. But have like an offsite, have some ice-breaking things. The thing that I've found be very important, especially if your teams are hiring a lot right now, a lot of the new employees have never stepped foot in an office, and they've never seen the other people face to face. So trying to be as explicit as possible with getting people together with some ice-breaking sessions, whether it's a virtual escape room, whether it's a planning session, whether one thing that we did too for some of my teams is, you see behind me and you see me, but you don't know what I see, right? What's in front of me. So we sort of had and I use Mural for this. We sort of had an exercise where everyone took a picture from their point of view this way, and then we uploaded it, and then we had a little game where everyone tried to guess, whose computer it was matching to the person, based upon what they see, because they only see behind you. But it's just some things like that. But the important thing of that was it led to conversations like, I'm sitting here because I'm sharing it with my family, or this is my view because I like to look out this window and I watch my kids play, or it just got a lot of natural conversation, which was, I think, an important piece of the exercise.
Cool. Thank you so much. And then we have a question from Denso from the audience. So he's asking, how do you track or measure a team member's performance? And also, how do you decide if the technical skills are dissimilar between members? Okay, so basically he's asking evaluation of team members' performance as well as being able to rank one over the other.
Well, I try not to have to do stack ranking. Like for employees, I'd rather do grouping of employees. I think when it goes down to how to measure and track employees, I think measurement against goals it goes back to what I mentioned earlier on in the talk, is about setting your goals and setting your expectations. So there are some explicit goals and expectations, maybe for a person, and then most organizations typically have a career ladder, some type of rubric which sort of lays out the general expectations for a person at that role. If you are not at a large company that has this, and you're a leader at a smaller organization, I would say that one of the single most important things that you can do and should do is create a career ladder for your engineers. And again, it goes back to that setting the appropriate expectations so that everyone has a good understanding of where they are and what they need to do to get to the next level. So one, there's usually the general, how is an employee or an engineer tracking against the expectation for their level? And then how are they tracking against individual goals that they have that you've set for them over a time period, right? And for each of them, it's super important to try to have some measures of success and some milestones for check-in. It could be a milestone of like you completed a project in a certain amount of time. It could be you have a high level of code reviews. Like you go through with quality code reviews and you do them less than your response time is less than, I don't know, 3 hours for code review. I'm just making some things up, like whatever kind of it might be that you think is an appropriate expectation for that. And then you can calibrate, based upon their explicit performance in a specific area. It's hard to say if someone's more technical or not, but you can certainly say how someone is able to, dissect a problem, how they're able to like onboard other engineers, how they're able to help educate other people, bring them up to speed, dissect a problem, and then, look at the complexity of that problem and see how an engineer potentially is able to solve for those complexities. But I think the biggest thing that's important here, especially is making sure there's no bias and making sure everybody is calibrated equally and fairly according to a sort of a set rubric that's sort of not changing.
Well, thank you so much. I think Wayne has. I think we only have about time for one or two more questions. So handing it over to Wayne.
So we have another question. So this coming one of the pre-selected questions from the pre-submitted questions, from the audience. Okay, so I think this will be a very interesting one. Like, how do you find your mentors and sustain your relationships with them?
Yeah, this is so to go up a level 2. You should find a mentor. You should find a coach, however it may be. And there's some differences between coaches and mentors. There are some organizations I've been where I was able to. I was lucky enough to have the company sponsor, a sort of professional coach, right? And super helpful. I've also been in organizations where I presented that, would the company sponsor me for a coach? And going with some research. This is why I think it's important. This is how it can help me be impactful. This is how it'll help the organization. Here's the ROI. And then they went ahead and approved that. So coaching is one thing where it might be easier to find a coach because there's word of mouth, there's referrals, there's some very specific ones for technical people. And I could recommend some if anyone needs any. But that's sort of one thing, and that's certainly one track, and that's certainly very helpful. I think from a mentorship standpoint, that can either sort of happen organically, or it can sort of be something that you are very particulate and you're actually going and proactively doing. And the organic ones, typically, maybe you have an association with someone that's 3 levels above you or something, and you just sort of meet and there's common interest, and you sort of ask, hey, and it evolves into, let's make this a little bit more formal mentorship. Some companies like I think Google, Facebook, Amazon have sort of mentorship programs inside of them, right, where you can apply and they match up. Companies like Plato, where I met Julius before, they have some mentorship programs as well. Otherwise, it's also about kind of reaching out to people, and maybe you start with asking them advice. You've read an article of theirs, you ask about a specific piece of it. There are things like the RAND's Slack leadership channel on Slack, which is a great resource that I encourage lots of people to do. It can be a total time waster because there's so much awesome information on there, but just Google it, and if you can apply to get in, they let everyone in. And you can find some people out there. Maybe you find someone that's answering a lot of questions in a specific area that interests you. And you can reach out to them and say, hey, I really value your opinion on this. I've learned a lot from you. Would you mind if we maybe had a session once a month where I could ask you some one-on-one questions? And, most people are not going to say no because they don't want to. The thing I've found is just usually they don't have enough time, but sometimes they will. Right? And a lot of people want to give back. So that's how I will answer that.
Cool. Thank you so much, Christian. And it's time, so we don't want to, it's more of your time. It's always fun to have these kinds of sessions with you. We are learning a lot, and as you can see from the live chat as well, there's so many questions that are left unanswered. Sorry about that, everyone. But that said, we will have subsequent events as well with other mentors, other engineering leaders. And of course, if Christian wants to come back, we are more than happy to have Christian again to share more about, his insights and all. Christian, thank you once again for being with us. It's a great pleasure to have you.
Absolutely. And thank you, everyone. I appreciated the time. Hopefully I get to meet you all in person. If I ever go back to Singapore, I'll definitely stop in the offices. Okay.
Very much looking forward. Thank you once again. So we would like to just kind of briefly summarize as well some of the book recommendations that Christian had. He mentioned about The Elegant Puzzle. We are great fans of it as well. So we would like to recommend this to everyone to kind of check it out and kind of learn quite a bit of what Will Larson has noted in the book. Again, as Christian noted, there might be some areas that you agree, some areas that you don't agree, but try to pick the ones that you think would work in your organization. As well as thanks for the feedback. This another book that will help us kind of manage, feedbacks as we receive better. So if like as he said, it's something that we have to do. We have to keep reading, keep learning. So this is something that you might want to take a look at. Handing it over to you, Ian.
So, as always, we always want to hear from the community. I think this is not just for today's period of rework in terms of work culture. If you are enthusiasts working on, Android, Kotlin, Google Cloud, Chrome, so on and so forth, TensorFlow as well, and if there's something that you want to, some effort or project that you want to share with the community, do write it to us. We have pasted this shortened link over here, GTG-SGCFP. So let us know. We'll definitely reach out to you and try and slot you in one of our events where we'll reach out to our community with your topic. Okay, and last but not least, as always, social channels, please follow us. I think very important because in the coming months we're gonna have many exciting events. So we definitely want to keep you in the loop in terms of when these events will occur. So definitely look out for our YouTube channel as well as our community and Facebook page. Yeah. With that, I think so we have come to the end. So Julius, is there anything else you would like to add?
No, I think that's the end of today, and looking forward to have you all again in the next session. Thank you. Have a good day. Bye bye.
You guys.